On the line with us, our old buddy Larry Cohen. He is the board chair of Our Revolution. He is the board chair of the Democracy Initiative, and he is the past president. Boy, he has a penchant for being the big cheese here. The past president of the Communication Workers of America, CWA. The website, ourrevolution.com. And Larry Cohen is on the line with us. Larry, welcome back.
Yeah, great to hear you.
It's great to have you with us. Tell us about the Democracy Initiative and what Jeff Merkley is up to.
Sure. So the Democracy Initiative actually started 5 years ago around the issue of Senate rules. At that time, President Obama had named about 300 people who couldn't be confirmed because the Senate required 60 senators to put the nomination on the floor. This is after hearings and everything else. Mm-hmm. And so they couldn't get 60 on anything. And so we helped bring together people, not who did democracy work so much, but people who did labor, environment, civil rights, and other work that were paying the price for all this. And actually at that time, we called it Fix the Senate Now. It then became the Democracy Initiative. We could get a limited rule change around nominations. And then we now let's move ahead. So the Republican Congress and the Republican Senate with President Trump has quickly moved to expand that. And that's very ironic because when we pushed at the time for this limited change, the big rejoinder was, well, then the Republicans will have that. Well, of course, the Republicans have gone further. They confirmed 2 Supreme Court nominees, 60 votes, which the Democrats would not be able to do. And they also were about to repeal the Affordable Care Act with 50 votes. I should have said 50 in terms of the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. But they failed when McCain voted no, so they lost by 1 vote. They had 49. But if we went back to 2010, President Obama refused to push the Senate to go ahead by a majority to enact the Affordable
What we're talking about here is blowing up the filibuster, right, Larry?
Yeah, well, they don't talk anyway. So the filibuster is one of the issues.
Yeah.
So theoretically, on the filibuster, you're talking about people speaking and having the right to speak. Mm-hmm. But the modern Senate, in the last 30 years, they don't speak. They just put up their hands and say no, and then the Senate moves on to the next item.
Right.
But so what we're talking about now, to jump ahead with Jeff Merkley, who's been a champion all these years for all of this, is that we're saying to Merkley and others who are going to run for president, almost certainly, there's 9 Democratic senators likely to run or considering running. We want you to commit now when you run that, in fact, you will support a Senate that governs by a majority. So we're sick and tired of hearing about all the policy items you're going to enact, as we did with President Obama, and then none of them ever get to the Senate floor. So even though they pass the House overwhelmingly, like Labor's Employee Free Choice Act or climate change, they never get to the floor of the Senate because there's not 60. There is no chance, unlike 2009 when briefly there were 60 Democratic senators, if that's including all of them as Democrats, there's no chance to get to 60. It could be decades. It's certainly not going to happen in 2021. So what Merkley is helping us lead on, and we will mobilize hopefully hundreds of thousands of people, is that we want these Democratic Senate candidates and their other Senate colleagues to say right now, when we're the majority again, we're going to govern with a majority. There's 3 different ways to do that, but that we're going to not come back to the American people and say, we can't do anything on health care, we can't do climate change, we can't do anything on workers' rights because we don't have 60 votes. No other body in the world works like that. It's time the Senate stopped working like it as well.
It's interesting, we had a caller earlier today and we were discussing the filibuster or the requirement for a supermajority or for 60 votes. And we have a situation, and perhaps you know the exact numbers, but they're in the neighborhood of this, that roughly 60% of Americans are represented by roughly 40% of senators. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. This goes back to slavery, which you've written about extensively. It was done deliberately to protect the slave states.
Yeah. So if you have the majority of Americans being represented by a minority of senators, then it seems that the filibuster would give that minority of senators a little more power, the ability at least to slow down or gum up the works. Why do away with that?
Well, the minority of senators are the ones from the small states that represent a fraction of the population to begin with, right? So no other body in the world is set up like that to begin with, where every state gets two, whether it's Wyoming or Delaware or whether it's New York and California.
Well, no, I'm saying that the minority of the minority of the Senate right now is Democratic, not Republican, and they represent actually
Correct.
a majority of Americans. But back to you.
Yeah, in this particular case, they do. So the fact is that I think we have to imagine what we can do to change the country rather than what we just do to resist.
Right.
So we can resist based on the House of Representatives, and we're able to do that now, finally. But if we actually want to go forward, we have to have a method, and there are three different ways that it can be done, that legislation can move forward in the Senate. And we need senators, Democrats, finally to say, oh, we just saw the Republicans do this. We're prepared to govern based on a majority now, not based on a supermajority of 60.
Is the situation, and forgive my not knowing this, it seems like I probably should, but is the situation that some things don't come to the floor for a vote unless there are 60 votes because the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, refuses to bring them to the floor, and 60 votes essentially forces his hand? Does that work like the way a discharge petition does in the House?
It's not the same exactly, but the result's the same. So it's called cloture. To end debate, theoretically there's a debate.
Right.
To end debate, you need 60 votes. And it's that rule. There's three ways to go around that rule. One is what the Republicans did on repealing Obamacare, which is to call it a budget item. Budget items only need 50 votes.
Right, that's reconciliation.
Correct. And so that's one. That's the easiest one because, while Obama and that Senate considered health care not a budget item, to get rid of it, they just called it reconciliation, and they, again, were one vote short. So that's the easiest way. The second way is to make people talk. So the old filibuster back in the 1960s, when Southern Democrats wanted to block civil rights legislation, they had to talk and talk and talk. And the Senate would remain open. And when they stopped talking, the bill would go to the vote because it's a cloture measure. It's not really that you need 60. It's that you need 60 to stop debate.
Right. Cloture is a fancy way of saying shut up and vote. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the three ways. The second way that Merkley would support, that we would endorse, is to make them talk and keep the Senate open. And, that may provide some discomfort to senators who want to fly away on Thursday nights, but it's nothing compared to the discomfort of no governance and we can't move the country forward.
Right.
The third way is what the Republicans did to get their Supreme Court nominees through. It's called overruling the chair. It takes under a minute, and the chair rules that there aren't sufficient votes to go to the floor for Gorsuch, and there's a motion a point of order to overrule the chair. A majority can overrule the chair, and that's it. That's how they did Gorsuch, and then that stays until there's a new precedent. So you're not really changing the rules. You're just changing how the rules. This sounds like gibberish, but this is how they operate.
Right.
You're just changing how the rules are enforced.
Throughout that two-year period, that Congress?
Excuse me?
Does that last throughout that two-year period, that entire Congress?
No, it continues until the chair is overruled again. That Congress or the next Congress or whenever.
I see.
Simple majority can overrule the chair in any parliamentary body, including this one.
Fascinating. It's kind of in the weeds, but it's really, really important stuff. And what's Jeff Merkley's role in all this?
So Jeff Merkley, back in 2012 and 13, with Thom Hartmann, who's since retired, led the effort to get the Democratic Senate to say, wait a minute, we got 100 judges backed up. We have no NLRB. It's gone because we no longer have 3 members. On and on. We must do something here. And in fact, Harkin, for decades, I don't know how long he was in the Senate, wanted also to have either talking filibuster or another way to bring measures to the floor based on a majority. But they got this part done. So Merkley was the young understudy, if we want to call him that. He's quite smart. And he's continued to champion this. And he has another essentially bill or resolution before the Senate right now saying that nominations of the president must be acted on within 100 days. Yeah. This is another outrage
Good stuff.
So anyway, Merkley is the champion on democracy.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Jeff Merkley is my senator, one of my 2 senators here in Oregon, and I am so proud of him. He is really, really great. Larry Cohen, the board chair of Our Revolution, ourrevolution.com. Thank you, Larry.